Now, this is a slightly contentious question. I hope you won't object. But you tell us that in 1994, the RAF believed that a female pilot's flying aptitude was of a lower standard than that of a male pilot. In addition, you mentioned that lady pilots at Cobham might have struggled to make the grade had they tried to join the RAF, unlike some of their male counterparts who worked for you. In light of the equality issues such opinions raise, would you like to expand on your position a little more?
Well, not particularly. I would. What I've written in my book is exactly what I think about it, and I don't think there's a simple answer to this one. And more evidence on female aptitude towards flying may well be available, but I'm purely going back to what I was briefed by the Director of Recruiting when I was taking over at Skempton about female aptitude. And it was very interesting that they showed this graph with the two curves about female aptitude versus male aptitude towards flying. And in fact, the fact is that the female curve was displaced to the left by and large. So what that told you was that some of these female pilots would be just as good as the guys, but you would have fewer of them if you follow the logic of the graph, if you understand what I'm saying. Yeah. So that was the fact that they were, at that time, aptitude testing all the females that went through selection to get a database going to have a look at this. And this is what it was coming up with. So I'm not saying for a moment you're not going to get very capable female pilots. We know there are very capable female pilots out there that always have been and there always will be. But if you want a large number of them, it might be difficult if you have a very high entry level to find enough females to meet the quota.
It's interesting. I understand entirely, though in particular, in the recent news of the resignation of the group captain recruitment, who has taken great exception to the quota system that the RAF are trying to introduce now. I hope you don't mind me bringing that up.
No, because that's exactly what I'm saying, because if you finish up with an arbitrary number that you want 20% female pilots this year, you may have a lot of trouble finding the right quality to meet that quota system.
Is part of that the fact that we're not attracting the right type of female pilot to the military? I mean, we know from the airline experience there are plenty of incredibly capable female pilots, and in fact, we shouldn't really be having a conversation about the sex of the pilot at all. We just should be looking at ability. But is there something we're missing when we look at the appeal military flying has to the ladies of, out there who might consider the job?
Well, I mean, military flying is a very difficult thing for a lot of people to get their brain around. I've done a lot of recruitment, particularly when I was in Spain latterly, talking to people about going into a career as a pilot. And I say, or I don't do it anymore, but I've always started off the conversation when mum and dad come along with their son or daughter. I usually start the conversation by saying, so you want to be a pilot? Yes. Okay. What is the cheapest way of learning to fly? Or how can you learn to fly without spending any money? And a lot of them just go, oh, I don't know. And then some say, oh, join the military. Yes. I said, and if you come to fly with us in Spain, to train with us, how much is it going to cost you? And I go, well, I don't know. I said, well, it's going to cost you about £100,000. So I said, on one hand, the military will teach you to fly for nothing. On the other hand, you're going to spend £100,000 to come and learn to fly down in Spain. And that's a good course, and it will get you exactly where you want to be, but it's £100,000. So discount learning to fly with the military at your peril, or think about it hard before you decide you want to go down the commercial route. And then they say, and quite often they say, well, we've actually thought about the military, but we've discounted it because A, the discipline, B, being shot at, it's dangerous, and they come out, fine, you've thought about it, that's great. don't join the military. Right, now let's talk about coming to Spain to fly with us.
If you want to attract the right type of pilot,
Yeah.
whether they're female or male, you've got to zero in your recruitment
Yes.
on people with the correct aptitude.
Correct, Nick. Yeah, I'm with you again. And I think joining the military as a pilot or aircrew is a very difficult thing for some people this day and age to make that decision. They want to go and do that. It's a real commitment. Because, as I mentioned in my book, it's not just a matter of going off in a very exciting aeroplane having fun. It's actually finding yourself on the potential receiving end of some nasty people, or in my case, finding that you're flying a Harrier across the Atlantic and then down the eastern seaboard to go and confront the Guatemalans. You just suddenly think, this is where I am. You've got to be committed to doing it. You've got to be committed to taking the government's shilling for doing that job.
Somewhat in contrast with Cobham, your time with the Spanish Flight Training School, which we've just mentioned, FTE Jerez, is noticeably more relaxed, enjoyable and successful. What do you put that down to?
Very simple, actually. Well, two things. Spanish people are lovely. The other thing is that it's a large flying school, but it's not a huge organisation. It's not like the Royal Air Force, and it's not like Cobham either. Cobham quite a large company. It's a fairly small operation where everybody knows everybody, and the issue there at FTE Jerez was that the CEO, a lovely Spanish guy called Oscar, selected people, and in our case, the flying side, which he was not a pilot, he'd done some flying, but he wasn't a pilot. He just wanted us to run it and do the job. And if we could make it work properly and safely, he was happy. So he was largely hands-off and appreciated what we were doing.
Sounds great. In your summing up, you mentioned that the Harrier Force was fortunate in being given the most able of pilots who went through training. I often wondered if that ever led to feelings of superiority amongst the pilots in the Harrier Force.
God, I couldn't admit to that, could I?
Well, perhaps I should be asking the rest of the Air Force.
You should be asking the rest of the Air Force about that. Yes, I think there is. That is probably a justifiable accusation, and in fact Clive Loader makes comment of it in the foreword to the book, quite rightly so as well. Absolutely. And I think, yes, the Harrier Force always saw itself as slightly different, and the reasons for that are quite obvious with the revolutionary aircraft and the fact that we did all sorts of wacky things, which is what the book's largely about, which we all enjoy hugely. So yes, you could become a little bit arrogant. And in fact, I tell the story when I arrived at Gloucester in personnel management, how my fellow squadron leaders had wound the girls up in the office about, Harrier pilots are special, and so on, which led to the early morning Monday whiskey drinking.
Excellent. Yes, well, you'll have to read the book to find out about that. Yeah. The Chief of the Air Staff, Sir Glenn Torpey, decided to prematurely scrap the Harrier Force, whilst the Jaguar's life was actually being extended. How did you feel about that decision?
Yes. It was a very unfortunate decision. I feel for Sir Glenn having to make that decision. There is no doubt that the Harrier had been developed to a very high standard at that point, with the GR9 in service, with the range of weapons that it can carry, the ability to operate off the flat top, and as I mentioned in my book, to see the aircraft come out of service along with the flat tops for the Royal Navy just at the time we needed them off Libya was quite ironic, really, and very sad. I think the decision was largely a Harrier versus Tornado one, Tornado GR4 one, and I have to admit the Tornado GR4, greater weapon carrying capability, longer range, 2 crew, all that sort of thing, more of them. It was probably a very sensible decision to keep the GR4 running and for the Harrier to go. And I say that very sadly, because it was a great aircraft and it left service too early. There is no doubt about that. But within the financial constraints that Sir Glenn was facing at the time, that's life.
Absolutely. Now, the Harrier was renowned as a difficult and potentially dangerous airplane to fly, and you mentioned the deaths of 4 OCU instructors killed just before you began your training. But interestingly, none of those accidents, there was a controlled flight into terrain, a mid-air collision, and an inadvertent ejector seat firing, were connected with the Harrier's unique flying qualities.
No.
So, do you have any thoughts on that?
They're all pilot error. There's no doubt about that. The flight into terrain up in Norway was put down to an optical illusion, and that
was that the little fir trees.
Yeah, the small fir tree versus the big fir tree.
Yes,
and that was what that was put down to. Which is very interesting, and of course optical illusions have killed a lot of people in flying, cloud banks versus mountainsides and all this sort of thing. You know, there are some very dangerous optical illusions out there. So yes, it was pilot error, but we're all human, and if you get an optical illusion, it can finish up with flight into terrain, which is what happened in that case. The mid-air collision between 2 instructors, it was a standard form of attack. There was a mistake made. It was human error. And again, that comes back to my point made earlier on about if you operate in the military, operating these machines, doing difficult jobs, mistakes are going to get made. And that was sadly one of those. And again, the guy who trod on his ejection seat handle as he was leaving the aircraft, I've done display flying. I think there is a lot of pressure involved in display flying, and it's distraction. You can be distracted before you get airborne with all the crowds and everything that's going on. You can be distracted after landing. After landing, there's that sort of euphoria. Right, I've done the display. It went well, blah, blah, blah. You get back onto chocks. You've forgotten to put your pin in. And it's just distraction. And again, it's human error. It's very sad. But as you say, nothing to do with the Harrier at all.
Interesting. In your summing up, despite the success of your career, I did detect a feeling of uncertainty that might have led to your early retirement. You certainly mentioned your lack of university background as one cause, but I know several very senior officers who had a more limited education, recruited as airmen and went up through the apprenticeship scheme.
Indeed.
Surely that shouldn't have been a major impediment for you.
I think it got pulled into start relief for me by going through the Royal College of Defence Studies course and then the Higher Command Staff course. Both those courses, you mentioned them earlier, but both those courses are for officers who are destined for higher rank, essentially 2 ranks higher from where you are. So as a group captain, I would have to have reports suggesting that I would make 2-star Air Vice Marshal. So otherwise I wouldn't have been sent on the courses. When I went on those courses, yes, I found the courses very interesting. I found them demanding, but I also found myself rubbing shoulders with people from across the military and other sectors who were destined for higher things, as I was supposedly, and I just didn't see myself in that category, to be totally honest.
By any standards, Chris Burwell has successfully enjoyed a varied and demanding flying career that has taken him from the world of a Harrier pilot to one of the lesser known areas of professional flying in the civil sector. His book candidly describes his life in all sorts of cockpits, doing a number of different jobs that the reader will undoubtedly find fascinating. It's a thoroughly good read, and I commend his memoir, 9 Lives, to you.